Your mind won't stop. It replays yesterday's conversation. It predicts tomorrow's disaster. It analyzes worries, spirals. You're exhausted from thinking, yet you can't turn it off. Sound familiar? Here's what you need to know. Overthinking isn't a character flaw. It's a learned habit. And research shows rumination, repetitive negative thinking, is actually a causal mechanism in developing and maintaining anxiety and depression. Studies reveal that 50 to 75% of adults struggle with overthinking. You're not broken. You're human. But here's the good news. Science proves that overthinking can be reduced through targeted interventions, with brain imaging showing actual shifts in connectivity when people learn to break the cycle. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending problems don't exist. It's about understanding how your brain got stuck and giving it a way out. In this audiobook, you'll discover why your mind loops endlessly and, more importantly, how to interrupt those loops. Not with complicated techniques, but with simple, practical strategies backed by research. Because peace of mind isn't about thinking better thoughts. It's about thinking less and living more. Ready? Let's quiet that noise together. Chapter 1: Understanding the Overthinking Mind. Your brain is trying to protect you. That's what makes this so difficult to understand. The endless loop of thoughts, the constant replaying of conversations, the relentless analysis of every decision, it all started as your mind's attempt to keep you safe. But somewhere along the way, the protection became the problem. There's a crucial difference between thinking and overthinking, between healthy reflection and destructive rumination. Reflection has purpose. You consider your experiences with the intent to learn something, to identify insights, to reach conclusions that help you move forward. It's exploration followed by resolution. You examine a difficult conversation, extract what matters, decide how to handle things differently next time, and then you move on. The process has a beginning, middle, and end. Rumination has no end. Rumination is when you think over and over about something in the past or future with negative emotions directly linked, constantly focusing on causes and consequences without moving toward action or solutions. It's the mental equivalent of chewing the same flavorless gum for hours, all the effort with none of the relief. You replay the conversation not to learn from it, but because your brain believes that if it analyzes it just one more time from just one more angle, you'll finally feel safe. You never do. Think about Jake. He spent 3 hours last night dissecting a meeting where his boss seemed slightly distant. Was it something he said? Did he miss a deadline? Is his job in danger? He replayed every moment, analyzed every word, imagined a dozen catastrophic scenarios. This morning, his boss greeted him warmly, mentioned she'd been dealing with a personal issue yesterday, and complimented his recent work. 3 hours of mental torture over nothing. But Jake's brain wasn't being irrational. It was doing exactly what it was trained to do. When you repeatedly engage in overthinking, you're not just having thoughts, you're carving neural superhighways in your brain that your mind begins to travel automatically. The more you engage a specific thought pattern, the stronger those neural pathways become, like a well-worn trail that gets deeper with each use. Your brain becomes wired to default to overthinking the same way it defaults to riding a bike. It's automatic. It's learned. And critically, it feels productive even when it's destructive. The neuroscience reveals why this happens. When overthinking activates your default mode network, the brain's autopilot system that operates during rest and mind-wandering goes into overdrive. This neural network actually believes it's helping you by keeping these thoughts in rotation, trying to solve problems or prepare for future scenarios. But the system gets stuck, creating feedback loops that feel impossible to escape. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and problem-solving, becomes overactive, leading to continuous loops of analyzing situations in excessive detail with focus on negative outcomes. Meanwhile, the amygdala, your brain's alarm system, heightens its activity, fueling negative thinking patterns as your brain becomes fixated on potential risks or failures, triggering stress responses even when there's no immediate danger. This is why overthinking doesn't feel like a choice. Your brain's negativity bias, a survival mechanism that prioritizes detecting potential threats, fuels the cycle naturally. For your ancestors, missing a threat could mean death. Better to imagine 10 dangers that don't exist than to miss the one that does. But in modern life, where most threats are social or psychological rather than physical, this bias becomes a prison. Your brain treats a potentially awkward social interaction with the same alarm it would treat a predator. And once the alarm sounds, it doesn't easily quiet. Stress makes everything louder. When you're under pressure, cortisol floods your system, and prolonged exposure impairs memory, concentration, and cognitive flexibility. Your brain literally can't think clearly. Yet this is precisely when overthinking intensifies, because your stressed brain desperately searches for control. The mental strain reshapes neural pathways, reinforcing the habit of rumination through repetition. Every time you overthink, you strengthen those connections. Every time you let the loop run, you make it harder to break free next time. For many people, this pattern didn't start in adulthood. It was installed early. Consider children who grew up in environments where love felt conditional, where mistakes brought harsh criticism, where chaos felt constant. Perfectionism often emerges as a coping mechanism in response to childhood trauma, as individuals strive to gain control and security by avoiding any possibility of failure or criticism. A child facing constant disapproval may adopt perfectionism to secure affection, and with perfectionism comes overthinking, because when you believe that anything less than flawless is failure, you analyze everything endlessly, searching for potential errors before they can be used against you. Research shows that traumatic experiences, especially criticism, neglect, and abuse, can create compulsions for perfectionism, with maladaptive perfectionism acting as a bridge between early trauma and depression in adulthood. If your upbringing taught you that your worth depended on meeting impossible standards, that mistakes meant rejection, that safety required constant vigilance, your brain learned to overthink as survival. You couldn't control your environment, but you could try to control yourself through relentless mental monitoring. It was adaptive then. It's destructive now. The modern world amplifies everything. Comparison culture, fueled by social media, creates constant opportunities to measure yourself against others. Perfectionistic tendencies have increased substantially among young people over the past 30 years, driven by greater academic and professional competition and the pervasive presence of social platforms with their harmful social comparisons. You see curated highlights of others' lives, and your brain interprets the gap between their apparent perfection and your messy reality as evidence that you're failing. So you overthink. You analyze what you're doing wrong. You replay your perceived mistakes. You imagine what everyone must be thinking about you. The loop tightens. Maria knows this intimately. She spent her 20s convinced everyone was judging her. She'd send a text and then spend hours dissecting whether the tone was right, whether she said too much or too little, whether the person was upset based on their response time. She'd attend social gatherings and replay every interaction afterward, searching for signs that people found her annoying or awkward. Her brain told her this analysis was necessary, that if she could just identify all her social errors, she could fix them and finally be acceptable. But the more she analyzed, the more anxious she became. The more anxious she became, the more she overthought. The cycle fed itself endlessly. Here's what Maria's brain didn't tell her. Overthinking isn't problem solving. It's the illusion of problem solving. Your mind believes that constant analysis will lead to breakthrough, that if you just examine the situation thoroughly enough, you'll find the answer that brings peace. But rumination rarely leads to resolution or action. It's repetitive thinking without progress. You're not moving toward solutions. You're spinning in place. This is the paradox. The behavior that feels most protective is actually what's causing the harm. Your overthinking mind isn't broken. It's not weak. It's not a character flaw. It's a learned response to circumstances that once required hypervigilance, shaped by experiences that taught you the world is unpredictable and dangerous, reinforced by a culture that rewards perfectionism while punishing vulnerability. Your brain is doing exactly what it was trained to do. The problem is that the training no longer serves you. The protection has become the cage. And truly understanding that overthinking is a habit formed through neural repetition, not a permanent feature of who you are, is the first step toward breaking free. Because if it's learned, it can be unlearned. If the pathways were carved through repetition, new pathways can be carved the same way. Your brain's neuroplasticity means it can create new, healthier patterns to replace anxious habits through consistent practice. The overthinking isn't who you are. It's what your brain learned to do. And that means you can teach it something different. Chapter 2. The Hidden Costs of Mental Noise. There's a price tag attached to every thought loop. It's invisible at first. You don't see the bill accumulating while your mind spins through scenarios, dissects conversations, and replays mistakes. But the cost compounds daily, quietly extracting from your energy, your relationships, your opportunities, and your sense of self. By the time you realize what you've paid, years have passed and the life you wanted is still waiting on the other side of decisions you never made. Analysis paralysis is where overanalyzing a situation causes decision-making to become paralyzed, meaning no solution is decided upon within a natural time frame. Claire experienced this firsthand when a promotion opened in her department. She was qualified, experienced, and encouraged by colleagues to apply. But her mind flooded with questions. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed publicly? What if the increased responsibility meant less time with her family? What if her current boss resented her? She spent weeks analyzing every possible outcome, researching similar positions, asking for advice from everyone she knew. By the time she decided to apply, someone else had already been hired. The opportunity passed while she was still weighing it. This is what overthinking does. It masquerades as careful consideration while actually functioning as avoidance. Research shows that anxiety is the root cause of analysis paralysis. The fear of making the wrong decision creates a cycle where the brain attempts to make the right choice every time, even when there's no perfect solution. You convince yourself that more analysis will lead to clarity. It doesn't. It leads to inertia. And while you're frozen in thought, life moves forward without you. The emotional toll is staggering. Mental exhaustion manifests when lingering mental fatigue affects your ability to think, solve problems, or process and regulate emotions, eventually creating challenges in daily life and relationships. You wake up tired even after sleeping. You can't focus on simple tasks. Small decisions, what to eat, what to wear, which email to answer first, feel overwhelming because your mental resources are already depleted from hours of invisible rumination. Daniel worked as an analyst at a financial firm. His job required sharp thinking and quick decisions. But by afternoon his brain felt like fog. He'd spend his commute ruminating about interactions with his boss, replaying meetings, analyzing his performance. Researchers found that increased mental effort during morning commutes was associated with emotional exhaustion upon arrival at work. By the time Daniel reached his desk, he was already drained. By evening, he had nothing left for his wife and kids. He'd sit at dinner physically present but mentally absent, still churning through workplace scenarios while his family talked around him. His wife eventually told him she felt like she was married to a ghost. Overthinking doesn't just exhaust you. It isolates you. It puts walls between you and the people who matter most. When you're trapped in your head, you can't be present with others. You misinterpret their words, read negativity into neutral comments, create problems where none exist. Overthinking in relationships causes anxiety through constant worry about a partner's actions, words, or intentions, with misinterpretations leading to unnecessary conflict and strained trust. You assume your partner's late response means they're angry. You replay a friend's tone, convinced they were judging you. You construct elaborate narratives about what people think of you, none of which are true, all of which create distance. Research reveals that chronic overthinking manifests physically through stress-related symptoms including headaches, fatigue, digestive issues like irritable bowel syndrome, and severe sleep problems such as insomnia. The stress of constant mental activity releases excess cortisol, and when the body maintains high cortisol levels over prolonged periods, it increases risk for high blood pressure, heart disease, and compromised immune function. Your body pays for what your mind can't let go of. You lie awake at night, unable to quiet your racing thoughts. You wake up with tension headaches. Your stomach churns with anxiety that has no specific cause beyond the general weight of unprocessed worry. The professional costs are equally severe. Overthinking breeds procrastination. When every action requires exhaustive analysis, you avoid action altogether. Projects get delayed. Deadlines get missed. Opportunities vanish. Perfectionism stands as a primary trigger for overthinking patterns, with research showing that high self-critical perfectionism predicts emotional exhaustion. You tell yourself you're being thorough, strategic, careful, but you're actually paralyzed by the fear that anything less than perfect equals failure. Think about Marcus. He wanted to start a business for 5 years. He had the idea, the skills, the passion, but he never launched. He spent years researching competitors, refining his business plan, analyzing market conditions, waiting for the perfect moment. Every time he got close to starting, his mind flooded with reasons to wait. What if the timing was wrong? What if his idea wasn't unique enough? What if he failed and people thought he was foolish? His overthinking convinced him that more preparation was always needed. 5 years passed. His idea became obsolete. Someone else launched something similar and succeeded. Marcus was left with regret and the painful realization that his fear, disguised as caution, had stolen his dream. The most insidious cost is what overthinking does to your identity. When you spend years stuck in mental loops, unable to make decisions or take action, you begin to believe this is who you are. Not someone who overthinks, but someone who is indecisive, incapable, weak. The longer you stay paralyzed, the more that paralysis becomes your self-concept. You stop seeing yourself as someone who can take risks, make choices, move forward. You become the person who watches life happen while thinking about it endlessly. Studies indicate that overthinking increases symptoms like insomnia, trouble concentrating, and loss of energy, which can escalate into chronic anxiety or depression when left unchecked. The cycle feeds itself. Overthinking creates anxiety. Anxiety fuels more overthinking. You become trapped in a loop where the mental noise generates the very problems it claims to be solving. You're not preparing for disaster. You're creating it. But here's what's important to understand. These costs aren't necessary. They're not the price of being thoughtful or intelligent. They're the price of a habit that hijacked your nervous system and convinced you it was helping. The exhaustion, the missed opportunities, the strained relationships, the stolen dreams, none of it is making you safer or wiser. It's just making you stuck. The hidden costs of overthinking aren't just about what it takes from you. They're about what it prevents you from becoming. Every hour spent ruminating is an hour you're not creating, connecting, building, or experiencing. Every decision delayed is a path not taken. Every relationship strained by your mental absence is a connection weakened. And every year that passes while you're trapped in analysis is a year you'll never get back. This isn't about judgment. It's about clarity. You need to see the real price of living in your head so you can decide whether you're willing to keep paying it. Because once you see the cost clearly, the choice becomes obvious. Not easy, but obvious. The question isn't whether overthinking is harming you. The evidence is everywhere. The question is, are you ready to stop letting it? Chapter 3: Why Your Brain Loves Complicating Simple Things. Your brain has convinced you that thinking equals solving. That analysis equals progress. That the longer you consider something, the safer you'll be. This is one of the most elaborate lies your nervous system tells. And you believe it every single day because overthinking feels productive when it's actually avoidance dressed up as wisdom. Here's what's really happening. Your brain is terrified of being wrong. It's terrified of failing, of being judged, of facing consequences it can't predict. So instead of acting, it offers you something that feels safer. More thinking. Endless analysis. Constant evaluation. The illusion of control is that we overestimate the influence that our behavior exerts over uncontrollable outcomes, making overthinking temporarily mask feelings of helplessness even though it doesn't actually solve the problem. You believe that if you think long enough, hard enough, from enough angles, you'll find the perfect answer. The answer that guarantees success. The answer that eliminates all risk. That answer doesn't exist. But your brain doesn't want you to know that. Research reveals that people engage in overthinking because their brains crave clarity and control in an unpredictable world, with replaying conversations or imagining outcomes feeling like attempts to get a grip, though this often backfires. The more uncertain life feels, the more your mind spins. It's trying to manufacture certainty through analysis. But uncertainty isn't solved by thinking. It's navigated through action. Think about Rebecca. She wanted to switch careers for 3 years. She had the skills, the interest, the opportunity, but she never applied. Every time she got close, her brain flooded her with questions. What if she wasn't qualified enough? What if she hated the new job? What if leaving her current position was a mistake? What if people thought she was foolish for changing paths at her age? She spent months researching, making pro and con lists, seeking advice from everyone she knew. She told herself she was being responsible, thorough, strategic. But she wasn't strategizing. She was stalling. Because thinking about the decision felt safer than making it. As long as she stayed in analysis, she didn't have to face the possibility of failure. She didn't have to risk being wrong. This is what maladaptive perfectionism does. Perfectionism is often driven by fear of failure, feelings of unworthiness, and frequently accompanied by anxiety and depression. People holding such views fear imperfection and believe that people will not like them or accept them unless they are perfect. When your sense of worth depends on flawless execution, every decision becomes high stakes. Every choice carries the weight of potential judgment. Studies show perfectionism leads to procrastination. Avoidance of tasks reduces anxiety temporarily, but it builds up again with greater intensity as the task nears completion, and some perfectionists become paralyzed by fear of failure without being able to start. Rebecca's perfectionism told her that unless she could guarantee success, she shouldn't try. So she didn't. And 3 years passed. Perfectionism and overthinking are inseparably linked. When you believe anything less than perfect equals failure, you analyze everything endlessly, searching for potential errors before they can be used against you. The constant fear of failure and overthinking result in heightened stress, which over time may lead to burnout, a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion. Your brain tells you this scrutiny is protection. It's not. It's paralysis. The terrifying truth about perfectionism is that it doesn't actually prevent failure. It guarantees you'll never find out if you could have succeeded. Research demonstrates that perfectionist tendencies lead to procrastination, fear of failure, all-or-nothing mindset, paralyzed perfectionism, and inability to complete tasks on time or at all. Some of the greatest achievers have refused to hand in their work due to fear of failure and worry that people will judge them. They had something brilliant to offer the world. But their brains convinced them that imperfect execution was worse than no execution at all. Here's the mechanism underneath all of this. Your brain is wired to detect threats. And for a perfectionist, mistakes register as existential threats. When you make an error, it doesn't just mean you did something wrong, it means you are wrong. Your identity, your worth, your place in the world all feel contingent on getting things right. So your brain does everything possible to help you avoid that threat. It offers you endless thinking, constant preparation, more research, more planning, more analysis, all designed to keep you from taking the action that might expose your imperfection. But here's the paradox. Research on the illusion of control shows that while illusory beliefs about control may promote goal striving, they are not conducive to sound decision-making, as illusions of control cause insensitivity to feedback, impede learning, and predispose toward greater objective risk-taking. You think you're minimizing risk by overthinking. You're actually increasing it, because the longer you delay action, the more opportunities you miss. The more isolated you become from real feedback. The more disconnected you are from the actual learning that only happens through doing. Clarity doesn't come from more thinking. The brain's attempt to manage uncertainty through excessive analysis, where we mentally loop through problems, often has the opposite effect. The more anxious and indecisive we become, as overthinking traps the mind in the illusion of control while keeping it stuck in avoidance. Studies show that even partial clarity, such as identifying the next small step rather than the entire plan, reduces stress and helps deactivate the body's stress response. You don't need the whole map. You need one direction, one next step, one small action that teaches you something you couldn't learn from another hour of deliberation. When Rebecca finally applied for that career change, she didn't have all the answers. She didn't know if she'd succeed. She didn't feel ready. But she applied anyway. And something extraordinary happened. Not because the job was perfect or because everything went smoothly, but because action provided information thinking never could. She learned what the interview process was actually like. She discovered which of her skills translated well and which needed development. She got real feedback from real people instead of imagined criticism from her anxious mind. Some of her fears were confirmed. Yes, there were challenges she hadn't anticipated. But most of her fears dissolved the moment they encountered reality. They'd only seemed catastrophic in the abstract safety of endless analysis. This is what action does. It collapses the infinite possibilities your overthinking mind generates into actual experience. It replaces speculation with data. It transforms what if into now I know. The brain doesn't trust this process because action requires emotional safety, the belief that you can handle outcomes, even difficult ones. And if you grew up in environments where mistakes brought harsh consequences, where your worth felt conditional on performance, where failure meant rejection, your brain learned that emotional safety doesn't exist. So it offers thinking instead. Because thinking can't hurt you. Only acting can. But that's not true either. Not acting hurts you every single day. It costs you opportunities, growth, relationships, dreams. It keeps you trapped in a version of yourself that's too afraid to evolve. The pain is just quieter, slower, easier to ignore until you realize years have passed and you're still stuck in the same patterns, still waiting to feel ready, still believing that one more hour of analysis will finally provide the certainty you need. It won't. Certainty comes from movement, not thinking. From trying, failing, adjusting, and trying again. From collecting real evidence about your capabilities instead of inventing fears about your inadequacies. Your brain will resist this. It will tell you it's too risky, that you need more time, more information, more preparation. But what you actually need is less thinking and more living. Because life isn't a problem to be solved through perfect analysis. It's an experience to be navigated through imperfect action. And the sooner you stop complicating simple things with endless overthinking, the sooner you can start building the life your mind keeps telling you to wait for. Chapter 4: Breaking the Overthinking Loop. The moment you recognize you're overthinking is the moment you have power. Not power to stop the thoughts immediately, that's not how the brain works. But power to interrupt the loop before it consumes another hour, another day, another opportunity. This is where understanding transforms into action. This is where you learn that breaking free from overthinking isn't about thinking better thoughts. It's about thinking less and being present more. The most effective intervention begins with a technique so simple it sounds almost trivial: grounding. When your mind spirals into past regrets or future catastrophes, grounding pulls you back to the only moment that actually exists, this one. Grounding exercises use mental distractions to help redirect thoughts away from distressing feelings and back to the present. The 5-4-3-2-1 technique is particularly powerful. Identify 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell, and 1 thing you taste. This exercise activates your sensory processing systems, naturally shifting focus away from self-analysis. Think about Lisa. She'd been stuck in an overthinking spiral for days, replaying a conversation with her manager, convinced she'd said something wrong, certain she was about to be fired. Her thoughts looped endlessly. What did he mean by that comment? Why did he look at me that way? Should I have said something different? The anxiety was so consuming she couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work, couldn't be present with her family. Then her therapist taught her grounding. When the spiral started, Lisa would stop and ground herself. 5 things she could see: her desk, her coffee cup, the tree outside her window, her keyboard, her phone. For things she could touch: the texture of her sweater, the cool surface of her desk, the warmth of her coffee, the smooth glass of her phone screen. 3 things she could hear: traffic outside, the hum of her computer, voices in the hallway. 2 things she could smell: her coffee, the faint scent of her hand lotion. 1 thing she could taste: the lingering flavor of her morning tea. The first few times, it felt mechanical. But something shifted. Her breath slowed. Her heartbeat steadied. The thoughts didn't disappear, but they lost their grip. She could observe them without being consumed by them. Research shows that grounding techniques help control symptoms by turning attention away from thoughts, memories, or worries and refocusing on the present moment. Lisa discovered that she didn't need to solve the thoughts. She just needed to interrupt them. But grounding alone isn't enough when emotions are driving the spiral. This is where the second technique becomes critical: naming emotions instead of fighting them. Neuroscientist Dan Siegel calls this, name it to tame it. The simple act of identifying emotions and putting words to them significantly lessens their intensity and helps manage them more effectively. When you experience a strong emotion, your brain's amygdala fires up, triggering impulsive reactions. When you pause to identify and label the emotion, you engage your prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking part of your brain, which helps regulate the amygdala's response and reduces emotional intensity. Research demonstrates that affect labeling is different from rumination. Instead of endlessly replaying emotions, it involves recognizing and naming them in a precise way, which helps the brain process and move forward. Studies show that mindfulness is associated with enhanced prefrontal cortical regulation of affect through labeling of negative affective stimuli, and that simply identifying emotions creates space between you and your emotions, allowing more balanced and thoughtful responses. Marcus used to fight his anxiety. When it showed up, he'd tell himself to calm down, to stop being ridiculous, to get over it. The resistance only made it worse. His therapist introduced him to naming. The next time anxiety surfaced, Marcus didn't fight it. He named it. This is anxiety. I'm feeling anxious right now. He didn't judge it or try to fix it. He just acknowledged it. The effect was immediate. The anxiety didn't vanish, but it no longer controlled him. By naming the emotion, he created distance. He could observe it without being overtaken by it. Studies show that when people verbalize their fears, their physical stress responses decrease over time, and by naming emotions, we allow ourselves to step back and evaluate situations more rationally. This practice extends to all emotions. When you're angry, name it, I'm feeling angry. When you're disappointed, name it, I'm feeling disappointed. Research reveals that the more intense emotions are, the more probable people are to employ rumination, making intensity a risk factor, while naming emotions interrupts that automatic spiral. The simple act of labeling prevents you from becoming fused with the feeling. You're not the emotion. You're the person experiencing it. That distinction matters more than you realize. Once you've grounded yourself and named your emotions, the third technique helps you regain control over your time and decisions. Limiting decision windows. Overthinking thrives in open-ended timelines. When you have unlimited time to consider something, your brain will use all of it. Studies demonstrate that even partial clarity, such as identifying the next small step rather than the entire plan, reduces stress and helps deactivate the body's stress response. Set boundaries around how long you'll spend thinking about a decision. Give yourself a specific window, 10 minutes, 1 hour, 1 day, and when that time expires, you make the decision with whatever information you have. Sarah struggled with this for years. Every decision, no matter how small, became a research project. Where to eat dinner required reading dozens of reviews. Which movie to watch meant analyzing ratings and trailers for an hour. Buying a new phone turned into weeks of comparison. The overthinking stole time she could have spent actually enjoying the experiences. Her therapist introduced decision windows. Sarah started small. She gave herself 5 minutes to choose a restaurant. No more. When the timer went off, she picked from the options she'd found. At first it felt reckless. What if she chose wrong? But something unexpected happened. Most of her decisions turned out fine. And even when they didn't, when the restaurant was mediocre or the movie was disappointing, the cost of a wrong decision was far less than the cost of the hours she'd wasted overthinking. Research shows that when the brain attempts to manage uncertainty through excessive analysis by mentally looping through problems, it often has the opposite effect, making people more anxious and indecisive as overthinking traps the mind in the illusion of control. These techniques work because they interrupt the automatic patterns your brain has developed. Overthinking is a habit, and habits change through consistent practice, not through force or willpower alone. The goal is to strengthen the ability to ground in the present moment when overthinking occurs, then approach with curiosity to bridge awareness and understanding on a path toward peace. Every time you notice overthinking and apply one of these techniques, you're literally rewiring neural pathways in your brain. The key is practice. Don't wait until you're in crisis to try these tools. Practice grounding when you're calm. Practice naming emotions during everyday moments. Practice decision windows with low-stakes choices. Research shows it can help to practice grounding even when you aren't dissociating or experiencing distress. If you get used to an exercise before you need it, it may take less effort when you want to use it to cope in the moment. The more you use these strategies proactively, the more accessible they become when you actually need them. When Lisa's manager finally addressed the conversation she'd been overthinking for days, it turned out to be nothing. He'd been distracted by a personal issue and hadn't even noticed the comment she'd spent days obsessing over. But the real breakthrough wasn't that the situation was fine. It was that Lisa had learned she didn't need to wait for external validation to find peace. She had tools now. She could interrupt the spiral herself. And that changed everything. Chapter 5: Simplicity as a Psychological Power Tool. The strongest minds don't pursue perfection. They pursue clarity. They understand something that overthinking culture refuses to acknowledge. Simplicity isn't settling. It's strategy. It's the deliberate choice to conserve mental energy for what actually matters instead of burning it all in the endless pursuit of optimal outcomes that don't exist. Research identifies two distinct approaches to decision-making. Maximizers who seek the absolute best option by exhaustively searching all possibilities, and satisficers who pursue good enough options that meet their requirements. You'd think maximizers, with their thorough analysis and refusal to settle, would be happier with their choices. They're not. Maximizers experience more post-decision regret, are more perfectionistic, less optimistic, more neurotic, and more likely to procrastinate compared to satisficers. Their constant quest for the best causes them to focus on what could have been rather than what is. They take a grass-is-greener perspective that leaves them perpetually dissatisfied, always wondering if they missed a better option. Satisficers, by contrast, stop their search when they locate an option that meets minimum standards. When shopping for a phone, they find one with the desired features and move on. When choosing where to eat, they pick a restaurant that sounds good and enjoy it. They don't spend hours comparing every possible alternative. Satisficers tend to be relatively pleased with their decisions and less prone to regret, even if better options exist, because they spend less time and mental energy on decision-making, leading to quicker, satisfactory results and greater overall well-being. Think about Jennifer. She spent 3 weeks researching vacuum cleaners. She read hundreds of reviews, compared dozens of models, analyzed specs, watched comparison videos. She created spreadsheets. She lost sleep. By the time she finally made a purchase, she'd invested so much emotional energy that the vacuum, which worked perfectly fine, could never justify the effort. She second-guessed herself for months, wondering if she'd missed something. Meanwhile, her friend bought a well-reviewed model in 20 minutes and was completely satisfied. Same outcome. Vastly different experience. This is the hidden cost of maximizing that nobody talks about. The relentless pursuit of optimal choices depletes cognitive resources, creates decision paralysis, and paradoxically leads to less satisfaction. Studies show that Americans make 33,000 to 35,000 decisions daily, and decision quality drops by up to 40% after making multiple back-to-back decisions. Every choice, what to wear, what to eat, which email to answer first, consumes mental energy. By afternoon, most people are already running on fumes. And when cognitive resources are depleted, your brain looks for shortcuts, leading to poor choices, impulsivity, procrastination, avoidance, or complete indecision. Herbert Simon, who introduced the concept of satisficing in 1956, argued that humans often lack the cognitive resources to maximize. He formulated an approach called bounded rationality, recognizing that in the real world, true optimization is impossible. We don't have infinite time, infinite information, or infinite mental capacity. Satisficing isn't laziness or a lack of standards. It's adaptation to cognitive reality. President Barack Obama understood this. He wore the same style of suit every day to eliminate unnecessary decisions. Steve Jobs wore the same outfit for decades. Mark Zuckerberg does the same. These aren't people lacking options. They're people protecting their mental resources for decisions that actually matter. By eliminating trivial choices, they conserve cognitive bandwidth for complex problem solving. Studies show that leaders facing constant decisions experience burnout, resulting in reduced productivity and creativity, while decision fatigue in professional settings leads to errors, poor judgment, and decreased performance. Decision fatigue manifests in subtle but devastating ways. When you're mentally depleted, you become more impulsive, making choices without adequate deliberation. Or you become paralyzed, unable to decide anything at all. Research demonstrates that cognitive overload occurs when the brain is overwhelmed by volume or complexity of decisions, leading to reduced mental clarity and focus. Your working memory has severely limited capacity. Every piece of information, every choice, every calculation contributes to cognitive load. When that load overwhelms capacity, processing efficiency declines. Your brain resorts to simpler heuristics, ignores relevant data, or simply shuts down. Marcus learned this after burning out from his startup. He'd been making hundreds of decisions daily: product features, hiring choices, marketing strategies, investor pitches. Every decision felt critical. Every choice demanded perfection. He analyzed everything exhaustively, convinced that thorough consideration would prevent mistakes. Instead, it paralyzed him. Projects stalled. Opportunities passed. His team became frustrated, waiting for clarity that never came. When the company collapsed, Marcus realized his perfectionism hadn't protected him. It had destroyed him. His rebuilding process centered on a radical shift: embracing good enough. He set decision windows. He established minimum criteria for choices and stopped once those criteria were met. He automated recurring decisions through routines and systems. He delegated what didn't require his specific expertise. Simplifying decision-making creates structured frameworks where individuals establish clear criteria based on values, goals, and priorities, quickly eliminating options that don't align with objectives. The transformation was immediate. His mental clarity returned. His productivity soared. His new business thrived because he wasn't wasting cognitive resources chasing perfect answers to questions that didn't have them. This principle extends beyond decisions. Simplicity in routines, goals, and daily life creates mental freedom. When you have a consistent morning routine, you're not deciding what to do, you're just executing. When your goals are clear and focused, you're not constantly questioning your direction, you're moving toward it. When your life isn't cluttered with endless options, obligations, and complications, you have space to think, create, and be present. Research reveals that too much choice increases stress and decision fatigue, while environments with fewer options lead to greater satisfaction with outcomes. The psychology of simplicity shows that our brains crave efficiency. By embracing simplicity in thoughts, choices, and experiences, we reduce mental clutter, enhance clarity, and make life feel more manageable. Cognitive load, the mental effort required to process information, affects our ability to focus, make decisions, and manage stress. When bombarded with excess, our cognitive resources are depleted, leaving us feeling drained and overwhelmed. Chapter 6: Training your mind for calm, not chaos. The transformation from chaos to calm doesn't happen through wishing or waiting. It happens through deliberate training, the kind that reshapes neural pathways and rewires habitual responses. What neuroscience reveals is remarkable. 8 weeks of consistent mindfulness practice reduces activity in the amygdala, your brain's fear center, meaning you experience less intense stress reactions over time. This isn't metaphor. This is measurable change in how your mind processes the world. Consider Maria, a financial analyst who spent years measuring her worth by quarterly performance. Every downturn felt personal, every success temporary. A large-scale study involving over 2,200 participants found that even short mindfulness exercises significantly reduce stress, with body scan meditation showing the largest effect. Maria began with 15 minutes each morning, sitting quietly, observing her breath. Nothing elaborate. Just consistent attention. Within 3 weeks, she noticed something shift. The tightness in her chest when opening her laptop eased. The catastrophizing thoughts about market volatility lost their grip. Journaling emerged as her second anchor. Research demonstrates that writing about emotional experiences enhances neural processing in areas related to cognitive control and memory, improving mindfulness and leading to better emotional regulation. Maria started writing 3 pages each evening, not censoring, not perfecting, simply transferring the mental noise onto paper. After just 2 weeks of daily journaling to reframe unpleasant events, participants experienced reduced depressive symptoms, lessened stress, and increased life satisfaction that persisted for at least a month after journaling concluded. The revelation came when Maria understood what her therapist kept emphasizing: outcomes don't define worth. Psychologist Gabor Mate distinguishes between contingent self-esteem, which relies on external validation and remains fleeting, and genuine self-esteem, which is unwavering and comes from within. For years, Maria's self-worth fluctuated with stock prices. Now she began practicing what cognitive psychologists call decoupling, the deliberate separation of identity from achievement. She created a morning practice: controlled breathing before checking emails. Breathing is the #1 and most effective technique for reducing anger and anxiety quickly. 4 seconds inhaling through the nose, hold for 4, exhale for 6. This physiological intervention activates the parasympathetic nervous system, literally switching the body from fight or flight to rest and digest mode. Simple but profoundly effective when practiced consistently. Marcus, a surgeon, discovered structured reflection after a difficult patient outcome nearly destroyed him professionally. Research from over 1,500 athletes found that only 26% of professionals could always separate their self-worth from outcomes. Marcus realized he fell into the majority. His entire identity wound tightly around surgical success. He began asking different questions in his evening reflections: not "did I perform perfectly?" but "what did I learn today? Where did I show up with integrity? How did I serve my values regardless of outcome?" This shift represents what psychologists identify as process orientation rather than outcome orientation. Marcus started tracking moments when he responded thoughtfully rather than reacted anxiously. Small wins: pausing before speaking in a tense meeting, acknowledging uncertainty without defensiveness, asking for help when needed. Participants who completed mindfulness programs reported noticeable reductions in stress levels, leading to feelings of calmness and relaxation, along with improved ability to manage daily stressors. Creating mental safety became foundational. Marcus established non-negotiables: no checking work emails after 7 p.m., mandatory 15-minute morning meditation, weekly therapy appointments. These boundaries weren't luxuries but requirements for psychological sustainability. Regular practice literally rewires your brain to handle stress better with consistent effort. As research shows, participants experience up to a 30% reduction in perceived stress levels within 8 weeks. The hardest part? Trusting himself again after failures. Self-compassion research provided the framework. Self-compassion involves self-kindness versus self-judgment, acknowledgement of others going through similar situations, and being mindful of feelings in moments of distress. Marcus practiced treating himself as he would treat a struggling colleague, with patience rather than condemnation, curiosity rather than criticism. Elena's story illustrates how emotional honesty accelerates healing. A marketing executive who excelled at projecting confidence, she privately battled severe anxiety. Her breakthrough came through radical honesty in her journal. A 12-week web-based positive effect journaling intervention showed participants experienced improvements in psychological, interpersonal, and physical well-being. Elena wrote about fear without minimizing it, anger without justifying it, sadness without apologizing for it. Journaling helps interpret or reappraise emotional events from new perspectives, and although expressive writing may temporarily intensify emotions, it ultimately helps individuals process and regulate those emotions. Elena's initial entries were raw, chaotic. But over weeks, patterns emerged. She recognized triggers, identified unhelpful thought loops, and most importantly, stopped judging herself for having human reactions to difficult circumstances. Quiet moments became sacred practice. Elena discovered that solitude, which she'd always filled with podcasts or music, offered powerful medicine when embraced. 20 minutes each evening sitting in silence, not meditating formally, just existing without distraction. Participants reported heightened awareness of mental and emotional states, as well as bodily sensations, finding themselves more present and mindful in daily activities. This practice of simply being, without performing or producing, gradually taught her nervous system that safety exists even in stillness. The three of them, Maria, Marcus, and Elena, share common threads in their transformation. They learned that calm isn't the absence of stress but the presence of steady internal resources. They discovered that mental discipline isn't about controlling thoughts but about choosing responses. They understood that self-worth independent of outcomes isn't arrogance but psychological health. Consistent emotional discipline allows the mind to relax because it no longer interprets every challenge as existential threat. When you know your worth isn't on trial with each decision, when you've practiced returning to center hundreds of times, when you've built trust with yourself through repeated small commitments, your baseline shifts. Many participants reported improvements in mental health and well-being, including reduced symptoms of anxiety and depression, increased self-awareness, and improved emotional regulation. Think clearer, respond intelligently rather than react anxiously. This doesn't mean never feeling stressed or never making mistakes. It means developing the capacity to notice stress arising, to pause before acting, to choose the response that aligns with values rather than defaulting to the reaction that temporarily soothes panic. The habits are deceptively simple. Journaling to process thoughts, breathing exercises to regulate physiology, structured reflection to extract learning, emotional honesty to prevent suppression, quiet moments to build comfort with solitude. What makes them transformative isn't complexity but consistency. Emotion regulation is like other skills. It takes practice, and studies suggest that it doesn't take that much practice to see a big difference. Your mind can learn calm the same way it learned chaos, through repetition and reinforcement. Every time you pause instead of react, every time you acknowledge difficulty without catastrophizing, every time you extend self-compassion instead of self-criticism, you're building new neural pathways. You're training your mind to default to calm rather than chaos. The question isn't whether this works. The science is clear. The question is whether you're willing to practice consistently, even when progress feels invisible, especially when old patterns feel comfortable. Calm becomes your baseline not through luck but through training. Chapter 7. Living a life that doesn't need overthinking. When clarity finally replaces mental chaos, something profound shifts. Not dramatically but unmistakably. You notice it first in the quiet moments, when a decision that once would have spiraled into hours of analysis now resolves itself naturally. You recognize it in relationships that feel lighter because you're no longer questioning every word, every gesture, every silence. This is what life looks like when you stop living in your head and start living in reality. Research demonstrates that rumination, the repetitive replaying of thoughts about the past, actively impairs decision-making. Studies show participants who ruminate find decisions more difficult and feel less confident in the choices they make. The overthinking pattern creates what psychologists identify as analysis paralysis, where excessive thinking doesn't lead to better outcomes but instead prevents any outcome at all. Understanding this transforms everything. The problem isn't that you think, but that you've confused thinking with living. Sarah spent 3 decades measuring herself against impossible standards. Every conversation became a performance requiring post-analysis. Every email demanded multiple revisions. Every choice triggered exhausting mental debates about roads not taken. Then, gradually, through consistent practice of returning to the present moment, something changed. She learned what neuroscience confirms. Creating space between stimulus and response activates the prefrontal cortex, your brain's rational center, allowing thoughtful responses instead of reactive overthinking. The transformation manifested in her relationships first. Where she once obsessed over potential conflicts, she now engaged directly. Research on emotional maturity reveals a significant positive correlation with self-confidence. When emotionally mature, people demonstrate high self-confidence, while emotional immaturity correlates with low self-confidence. Sarah discovered this truth firsthand. The more she practiced responding rather than reacting, the more her relationships deepened. People described her as present, grounded, someone who listened without rehearsing responses. Better decisions followed naturally. Decision-making researcher studies found that when confronting uncertainty, the moment of finally deciding isn't related to achieving absolute clarity. Rather, research attributes this resolve to an individual's metacognitive choice to stop deliberation. Sarah stopped waiting for perfect certainty before moving forward. She learned to trust herself enough to decide based on available information, knowing she could adjust course if needed. This represents what psychologists call process orientation rather than outcome orientation. When you separate self-worth from outcomes, when you understand that your value isn't determined by whether every decision proves optimal, the pressure dissolves. Research demonstrates that only 26% of professional athletes can consistently separate self-worth from performance outcomes. The majority struggle with this fundamental skill. But it can be learned. Sarah practiced daily affirmations that her worth existed independent of achievement, that mistakes were data points, not indictments of character. Meaningful presence emerged as her natural state. Life happens in the present moment, research reminds us, and staying present means truly living. When you're overanalyzing the past or caught in future hypotheticals, you remove yourself from the present. You eliminate your power to make decisions and take actions that lead forward. Sarah began practicing the 5-second pause when emotions surged, creating critical space between feeling and response. This simple intervention, stopping for 5 intentional breaths, interrupts automatic reactions and provides choice. The 5 senses became her anchor. When thoughts spiraled, she would deliberately engage with immediate sensory experience. What do I see right now? What sounds reach my ears? What do I feel against my skin? Overthinking pulls you into abstract mental representations, disconnected from concrete reality. Mindfulness research shows that focusing on direct, specific, contextualized experiences leads to functional outcomes, while abstract processing characterizes dysfunctional overthinking. Emotional maturity developed as Sarah learned that confidence doesn't mean eliminating doubt. Research confirms that emotionally mature people don't suppress feelings but manage them wisely. They demonstrate what scientists call the ability to experience feelings without being controlled by them. This distinction transforms everything. Sarah stopped interpreting every emotion as a command requiring immediate action. Instead, emotions became information, messengers rather than commanders. Her confidence grew not from achievements but from self-trust earned through repeated small commitments. Psychological studies reveal that self-efficacy, the belief in your ability to navigate challenges, develops through real experience. Trying, failing, learning, trying again. Sarah stopped seeking external validation for decisions. She learned to trust her judgment, knowing that even imperfect choices teach valuable lessons. The quiet strength others noticed wasn't bravado. It was something deeper, the capacity to sit with uncertainty without needing to immediately resolve it. Studies show that accepting and letting go of negative thoughts brings you back to the present moment. The more you actively train your brain to shift from past and future thinking to present awareness, the more automatic it becomes. Sarah practiced this daily, recognizing overthinking patterns and consciously redirecting attention to current reality. Relationships transformed when she stopped overthinking them. Research on emotional maturity shows it creates emotional safety because emotionally mature people remain predictable in healthy ways. They don't explode when upset, don't ghost when overwhelmed, don't manipulate to get what they want. This predictability fosters trust and psychological safety. Sarah's friends noticed the change. Conversations felt authentic because she was fully present, not planning her next response while they spoke. Professional decisions simplified dramatically. Where she once agonized over every choice, fearing catastrophic consequences from minor mistakes, she now evaluated options efficiently and moved forward. Research demonstrates that overthinking makes decisions more difficult and worsens existing stress levels. The psychological mechanism stems from perfectionism and fear of uncertainty. Sarah addressed both through consistent practice. She challenged perfectionism by deliberately making good enough choices and observing that outcomes rarely matched her catastrophic predictions. The deeper shift involved trusting herself in uncertainty. Life contains inherent unpredictability, and no amount of thinking changes that fundamental reality. Overthinking represents a futile attempt to predict and control the future. Sarah accepted this truth. Some things will always remain unknown, and that's not just acceptable but necessary. Growth requires venturing into uncertainty. Security comes not from controlling outcomes but from trusting your capacity to handle whatever emerges. This grounded self-trust manifests quietly. You don't announce it. Others simply sense your centeredness. You become the person who navigates challenges without drama, who makes decisions without endless deliberation, who experiences emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Research confirms that emotionally mature individuals recover faster from disappointment because they view setbacks as lessons, not verdicts. They maintain perspective, recognizing that most crises lose intensity over time. Living without overthinking doesn't mean abandoning thoughtfulness. It means thinking wisely rather than excessively. It means distinguishing between productive reflection that generates insight and destructive rumination that amplifies anxiety. Studies show that adaptive thinking focuses on specific, contextualized experiences, while maladaptive thinking operates through abstract, disconnected mental representations. The difference isn't how much you think but how you think. Peace emerges not from thinking more but from thinking wisely, acting calmly, and trusting yourself enough to let life move forward. This represents the culmination of everything: the awareness that you don't need certainty to proceed, the confidence that you can handle outcomes regardless of how they unfold, the emotional maturity to respond rather than react. Life becomes simpler not because problems disappear but because you stop creating additional problems through overthinking. You discover what researchers have documented, that the future happens in the present. The things occurring right now contribute to what comes next. When you're fully engaged with current reality rather than lost in mental scenarios, you naturally make better choices. You connect more authentically with others. You experience life more fully because you're actually present for it. This is living without overthinking. Not perfection but presence. Not certainty but courage. Not the absence of thought, but the wisdom to know when thinking serves you and when it simply spins wheels in mental mud. Trust yourself. Act from your values. Stay present. The clarity you've been seeking doesn't come from more analysis but from finally stopping the analysis and engaging with what's actually here, right now, in this moment. And then the next. And then the next. Until living in reality becomes more natural than living in your head. That's when you realize, peace was never about figuring everything out. It was about trusting yourself enough to move forward anyway.